Welcome to the deep dive. We're heading into some pretty intense territory today.
Yeah, it's kicked off by the reappearance of someone claiming to be an FBI insider.
Right. And it feels kind of familiar, doesn't it? We've seen these alleged insider things before, sometimes, like, surprisingly accurate. I'm thinking of those reports before the whole Hillary Clinton announcement came out.
Exactly. So there's this, natural curiosity, but also you got to have a healthy dose of skepticism when you look at what this news source is claiming.
Absolutely. So, where did this specific deep dive come from?
Well, it actually started with a listener who was interested in sort of the dynamics within the U.S. government, the potential shifts, the conflicts maybe happening behind the scenes.
Okay.
So our exploration is mainly based on a report that popped up first on Victorious Libertas,
Right.
and then State of the Nation highlighted it. We also pulled in some related articles just to, give more context to these claims.
Gotcha. So our goal here, really, is to unpack the main allegations from the supposed FBI insider. We want to try and understand what this spring purge they keep mentioning could mean and really dig into this whole idea of internal government fights they're describing. Okay, so where do we start?
Right. So the first big claim revolves around the spring purge idea, and it ties into the ongoing stuff around Obamagate.
Uh-huh.
The insider basically asserts that the allegations against Obama, connected to what they call Trumpgate, are, quote, only just begun.
Hmm. That immediately makes me think of Robert David Steele and the mention of a spring purge, reportedly from him.
Yeah,
Now, the source material itself points out, and it's worth us noting, too, that there are, questions about Steele's reliability.
for sure.
But the approach here seems to be, like, look at the claim itself, sort of a don't shoot the messenger vibe, maybe,
Yeah.
setting aside the messenger's track record for a second.
Exactly. You look at the substance.
Yeah.
And this idea of a purge, it kind of links up with the insider's next point, which is about the wiretapping of Trump Tower.
Ah, okay. The wiretapping. Always controversial.
Well, they don't just confirm that it happened, which is still debated, obviously, but they make an even bigger claim.
Okay, what's that?
Here's where it gets more complex. This insider alleges the wiretapping wasn't just a U.S.-only operation.
Oh.
They specifically point fingers at British intelligence and Israeli intelligence, saying they were involved.
Wow. British and Israeli.
Yeah, and they even sort of hint that more details might come out about that later.
Okay, that's a significant escalation of the claim. What's the reasoning given? Why would they allegedly do that?
Well, the rationale the insider offers is interesting. They claim both the British and the Israelis did this because they saw Trump as a, quote, threat to the deep state.
A threat to the deep state.
And then flip side of the coin, the insider also says this deep state is itself a threat to Trump. So it paints this picture of, really ingrained opposition, both inside and maybe from allies outside.
And this term deep state, it gets thrown around a lot. In this context, it sounds like they mean some kind of unelected, maybe permanent government structure working against Trump's agenda.
That seems to be the implication here, yeah. A sort of hidden power structure.
Which I guess leads us to that really striking analogy the insider uses about globalists.
Ah, the beekeepers analogy, yeah.
Yeah, they call them the population's beekeepers. That's quite an image. What's the thinking behind that?
It is vivid. So according to this analogy, right, these beekeepers, they supposedly harness the energy of the population like bees.
Okay.
They harness the honey, meaning the value produced maybe, and they control the oppression.
So it's a metaphor for manipulation, essentially, controlling the masses for the benefit of a few.
That's the clear implication. It suggests a deliberate kind of exploitative relationship. These kinds of metaphors pop up in politics sometimes. They simplify things, but they can also be pretty loaded, potentially inflammatory.
And the insider says they're leaking this stuff. Why? What's the stated goal?
The apparent aim is to stir things up,
Yeah.
to provoke public anger, get the bees buzzing maybe.
Right.
And ultimately, for people to demand a just result, they really lean into the numbers game too.
How so?
They mentioned this claimed 300-to-1 ratio, population versus government, and they throw out the figure of, like, 100 million guns estimated in civilian hands.
Okay, so the message there is pretty clear. Highlight the potential power of the public if they get angry enough.
Seems like it. And tying this back to that hidden power structure idea,
Yeah.
the insider also claims that some high-level arrests, which were apparently expected, got stalled
Stalled. Why?
because of interference, allegedly, from these beekeepers
Yeah.
right at top levels of government.
So that reinforces this narrative of an internal war, like within the government itself.
Exactly. It feeds into that whole deep state conflict idea we've heard discussed before, suggests a real tug-of-war going on inside the system.
Okay, now let's pivot slightly to the specific claim about Israel's involvement. You said they were mentioned in the wiretapping part.
Yes. The insider claims the Israelis were monitoring Trump specifically because of concerns about Steve Bannon and the whole America First slogan. The source material touches briefly on where that slogan came from, but the core point here is the perception by Israel, according to this insider, that it was a threat to their interests.
Interesting. So it raises questions about how, nationalistic talk in one country gets viewed by its allies.
Precisely. And this leads into another pretty significant prediction the insider makes.
Okay.
They believe Trump is going to, quote, let go of Jared Kushner soon.
Let go of Kushner? Really? Why?
The reasons given are too much liability and also pressure coming from the Israeli lobby.
Wow. Okay, considering how close Kushner and Trump are known to be, that would be huge if it happened. A major signal of a shift.
Absolutely. A potential shakeup in the inner circle and maybe his whole approach to foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East.
Then the insider makes this incredibly dramatic forecast. They predict a political purge.
Yeah, not just any purge. Their words are the likes of which we've not seen for decades, if not centuries.
Decades, if not centuries. That's incredibly strong language. And they connect this somehow to the economy.
They do. This is where the discussion brings in warnings from Michael Snyder about a potential economic crash.
Okay.
Snyder warns of something like an economic crash of biblical proportions, and he links it to global debt.
Global debt figures are always staggering. What number are we talking about here?
The estimate mentioned is over $2.25 quadrillion.
Quadrillion. 2.25. Quadrillion. It's hard to even wrap your head around that number.
It really is. And remember, economic forecasting is tricky. A lot of the different views out there. But that figure alone is, well, it's notable.
And Snyder apparently thinks this crash, if it happens, wouldn't be short-lived.
No, he suggests it could lead to potentially 100, if not to 1,000 years of economic struggle.
1,000 years. That's incredibly bleak. A generational, multi-generational catastrophe.
Extremely bleak. And the insider then tries to paint a picture of what that kind of collapse might actually look like on the ground for ordinary people in the U.S.
How so? What's the scenario?
It's pretty grim. The analogy used is basically a Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome situation.
Mad Max? Seriously?
Yeah. The reasoning given is our reliance on food imports combined with a potentially collapsing dollar value.
Meaning we couldn't afford to import food?
It seems to be the fear expressed, leading to desperate situations, people struggling for basic survival.
Okay, wow.
And then they add another layer. This economic hardship could be made even worse if there's widespread war happening globally at the same time. It just highlights how interconnected everything is and how vulnerable things might be.
Right, shifting gears again, but still on a very serious note, there's a claim about pedophilia investigations.
Yes. The insider states that Trump needs to, quote, get serious with pedophilia investigation.
Needs to. Why? As a political tool.
The implication seems to be that it's a way to potentially bring down his enemies or adversaries.
Okay. And this connects to Pizzagate.
Well, the host in the source material we looked at strongly urges their listeners to take the allegations around Pizzagate seriously.
Uh-huh.
They encourage people to actually look at the link materials and warn them not to just dismiss it all as fake news. Now, it's crucial for us to note here that Pizzagate itself is a widely debunked conspiracy theory.
Right, important context. But the source material dives into specific examples.
It does. It highlights one specific thing, an alleged email from Cheryl Mills to John Podesta.
Okay, what about it?
This email apparently references a sacrifice to a god named Mulak, supposedly happening in Mills's backyard.
A sacrifice, okay.
And the host of that source material interprets this email, and also other messages that use words like pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers.
Yeah.
They interpret these as potential code words for illicit activities, likely related to pedophilia.
So that's the interpretation being presented in the source material, that everyday words are hiding something sinister?
Exactly. It's presented as an interpretation based on context and other alleged communications.
Yeah.
We have to stress, though, There's no independent, verified evidence confirming that specific interpretation of those words as code in that context.
Got it. It's an interpretation from the source we're reporting on.
Correct. But the insider wraps up with a very broad, very concerning statement about corruption.
Which is?
They believe there's enough underbelly rot, as they put it,
Okay.
enough to potentially destabilize not just the U.S. government, but also Israel. And they claim enough to expose a large-scale political pedophile network.
Not just in the U.S.
No, they mention the U.S., the U.K., and even Asia, a global network tied to political figures.
That's an enormous claim. And the original interviewer, they asked the obvious question, didn't they?
They did. They asked, is it going to get bloody?
And the response?
Just acknowledging how hard it is to see a positive outcome given the sheer scale of all these alleged problems. Sort of a somber note.
Yeah. So, okay, we've unpacked a lot here. If we try to boil it down, what are the main threads running through all these claims?
Well, synthesizing it all, you're left with this narrative of, 1, a major conflict between a perceived deep state and the president. 2, these serious allegations of foreign intelligence getting involved in U.S. surveillance.
Right.
3, this prediction of a massive political purge, possibly linked to or happening alongside a really severe economic crisis.
Okay, and the fourth?
And 4th, this deeply disturbing assertion of a global pedophile network connected to powerful political figures.
It's quite a collection of claims.
Yep.
And the insider's main point seems to be pushing for public reaction.
Yeah, the central message really feels like a call for public awareness, for outrage even. That seems to be positioned as the potential trigger for forcing some kind of change. They keep coming back to that idea of the population's power in numbers.
The 300-to-1 ratio again?
Exactly.
So this deep dive has really walked us through a maze of interconnected and frankly potentially explosive claims. As you, the listener, process all this, what kind of fundamental shifts in your own understanding might even be needed to navigate such a complex, uncertain picture?
And maybe more importantly, what role does your own critical thinking play here? How do you evaluate such extraordinary allegations? Where does your responsibility lie? In trying to discern truth and maybe even demand accountability. That's really the big question to take away and chew on.